challenging. But it has its advantages, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I really think that no, without this hybridity, no, this event wouldn't be possible, basically.
Mm, mm, mm. I agree.
Okay, let's begin. Gabriele, hello again, and hello everyone in the classroom and on Zoom. I'm really excited to host another event in the New Media and Contemporary Culture series. This is the first event this semester, and this event is such a treat. My guest is Gabriele BALBI, a full professor in media studies at the University. Della Svizzera Italiana,
Nice.
he is a where he is a pro-rector for education and students experience in the academic community. He is currently chair of the ICA Communication History Division, and his last book is The Digital Revolution: A Short History of an Ideology, published by Oxford University Press. An amazing publication, by the way, Gabriele. Congratulations on that one. Um,
Thank you. We will discuss a little bit today, and I will
Lovely,
focus
lovely.
on it.
Yes, lovely. Okay, Gabriele's talk is three keywords for digital media history: revolution, maintenance, and failure. So, Gabriele, thank you very much again. This virtual floor is all yours now.
Okay. So first of all, Bartosz, thank you very much for the invitation, and I really like your series. Very nice idea. And today, as you asked me, I will try to provide a brief overview of what I'm doing and what I did in the last years in relation to digital media history. So the focus of today could be, I hope you can see clearly my slides, what we mean with history of digital media and or history of digitization or digitalization. So there could be several ways to do and to pair, we could say, digital media and history. We could do digital history in terms of doing history with the help of digital tools, or for example, several historians, they use digitized sources or they dig into sources. And so they use digitized sources as a source. And so they do history in this way. I'm not doing something like that. So if you want to do something like that, is not my pair of shoes, we could say. Another way to do history of digital media or history of digitization is focusing on the history of ideas of digital communication. And for example, we quite recently, a few years ago, published a book. As you can see, there are some Q codes here and there. So if you want to have more information about the books I'm talking about, you can scan it and you can have a look. This is an entirely open access edited book on the history of digital concepts, we could say. So we try to historicize some concepts that are considered digital. For example, artificial intelligence is digital, so we try to provide a history of that, or fake news, the history of fake news, or what we mean with telepresence, or being present. We can go back to the times of letters and exchanging of letters, so very ancient times. So we try to provide a kind of, as I said before, history of the ideas of digital communication. Then a third possible way is doing history of digital media and history of digitization as processes. And this is what I'm focusing more in my studies. And for example, we had another book published a few years ago, which is more an handbook called History of Digital Media. And as you can see from the table of content, we focus on history of different media, for example, the computer, the internet, and the mobile phone. And then we have a chapter on the digitization of previous media. So the so-called analog media, what happened with digitization? By the way, one of the key points here is the fact that and I will discuss it briefly later, digitization is not only a revolution, but there are also several continuities and persistences with the past. I think that an historical approach should be able to focus both on changes and on continuity. So I would try to use these keywords together. I don't know, Bartosz, how your students are familiar with these, fields like political economy of communication or STS, Sato network theory, etc. But you can do this kind of history of digital media under several different lenses and several objectives. For example, you could be interested in how politicians regulate the digital media or have been regulated over time. For example, you could find interesting parliamentary debates as a source. Historians are very keen at using sources. So we want to find sources. And for example, parliamentary debates is an interesting source to understand how a society change over time. Or very interesting reports, or again, how big tech narrate themselves. And we will see later some ads, for example, also advertisements are relevant to better understand how a company can narrate itself. Of course, we could also focus on business history, focusing on companies' archives, for example, and digging into companies' archives. When we deal with digital companies, it's not easy to access these archives. So those business histories are in generally opaque, we could say. And these big digital companies, especially big tech, are not so happy to disclose, for example, their archives. This is something to be considered for historians. STS and actor network theory, they study technologies per se and how the technology is built by the society, or how the technology is changed, is the mutual shaping, we could say, between technology and society. And so it's interesting here probably to understand the contrasting narratives of different relevant social groups. And of course, media studies are very have used a lot the user's perspective, call them audiences, and audience studies call them user studies. So for example, we have wonderful sources to study the history of digital media, like user manuals or ethnography or shadowing of users, what users do with digital technologies and digital media over time, and how our approach, for example, to the computers or the mobile phone has changed over time. That's another way to approach this issue. Today, I will try to mix a little bit of the stuff that I just introduced, focusing on three keywords. In the last years, I focused on these three keywords under different perspectives, and I will try to combine them and trying to let you know in the conclusion why I decided to pick up these three keywords. The first one is revolution, the second is failure, and the third one is maintenance. Let's go with the revolution, number one. And Bartosz was so kind to mention this book that was published in 2023. And it's a book about the digital revolution, but it's a book about especially how we talk about the digital revolution. So every time we start with a new project, Bartosz, I don't know if you agree with me, we need to have in mind the research question. So when we write a dissertation or when we write a paper, a book, we need to start with a question. And I start with this simple question: how has the digital revolution been told over time? So I didn't care about the different phases of the digital revolution or the important technologies or I don't know, people relevant in this history of digital revolution, but how has been told. It's not the first time that this question is asked, and there are several different stories. I try to, create 5 different typologies here. Very often, the history of digital revolution is a kind of history of success, great visions, great people, great objects that made every time a revolution. This is something that Baricco, a famous Italian novelist, I don't know if it's famous in Poland as well, wrote in one of his novels, The Game. But I mean, it's full of this kind of narrative, we could say. A second narrative, a second ways in which the digital revolution has been told is it has been told by big tech, large companies. They narrated themselves, and for example, Apple, Microsoft, Samsung, Amazon, and several others, they continuously narrate themselves and as the main characters, the protagonists of the digital revolution. Very often, point number 3 in this slide is a kind of linear story. It's a story going from big computers, the mainframe, to small computers, our laptops, from big telephone to the iPhone, from ARPANET to the internet, like it is a kind of inevitable path. The linearity is something that we should avoid as students and as researchers. History is more complicated in general, and it's full of failures of alternative paths that have been taken or not taken over time, options that were not taken. Fourth element, this story of the digital revolution has been mostly an American story, with some European exceptions. For example, the history of the World Wide Web, I discussed a little bit about it later, or Spotify, for example, which is again a European glory. But what is interesting here is the fact that the great majority of the stories that are available today are written by American scholars, or if are not American scholars, they are written about the American history of digitization. So we should de-Westernize, de-Americanize this story, and probably all other countries have several different or similar stories that need to be told, including Poland probably. And I have some friends that did it, and probably Bartosz, you are contributing to this new historiography of digital Poland. I don't know what to call it. It has always been told as a story of change, of revolution, of things that are totally different than before. And one of the questions and one of the things, the taken for granted ideas that I try to deconstruct with the book is the fact that we all believe to live in a different age compared to a few years ago. Why do we all believe this? Why we think that our contemporary era is totally different from the past eras? So I decided to use different sources, and I will show you some of the sources that I used, includes cartoons that are very relevant to understand the society of the time, what the society brief, if we can use this kind of word, what the society think about the contemporary times, and you will see several other sources. First point, if we all agree that we live in a different era with the digital revolution, of course, defining the digital revolution could be something very easy. The simple answer is not at all. I found in several sources very different definition of digital revolution. Even the starting point is not enough clear. Today is more and more discussed. A very famous book, Nicolas Negroponte, Being Digital, 1995, claimed clearly that we are entering into a new era where the atoms will be transformed into bits. So an era of dematerialization, where all the contents, all the technologies will be, decoded in 0 and 1, so the binary code. By the way, this is not true. Because, for example, digitization is producing more or less 3 billions of new objects per year, 1.5 billion of new smartphones that are sold every year, and other digital technologies, including wearables, computers, or whatever. So it's not at all the materialized revolution, but it's very material. And I will try to go back on this point when I will discuss about maintenance and how all these technologies need to be maintained over time. Even the names of the revolution are very different, and there is a huge variability of names. The digital revolution was called information revolution in the 1970s, then especially in the 1990s, digital revolution. Today, we have more, different terms like digital transformation, digital transitions, etc. An interesting source is Google Ngram Viewer. I don't know if you are using it. I don't know if you know, but Google has digitized several millions of books, and you can make an historical research, so research over time, of meanings that are written in these books. And as you can see here, is just a quantitative parameter, so it could be useless if you don't believe in quantitative, but on the other hand, it can provide you some glimpse of how a term is popular or not. And as you can see here, over time now we are in a moment in which digital transformation is much more popular than digital revolution. But for example, information revolution, if we go back to the early 1990s, was more popular than digital revolution or digital transformation that emerged in the last decade or so. I also included AI revolution here because it's one of the new ways to call the digital revolution, but it seems to be still less popular than the other today. Variable names. Second form of variability is periodization. I found several sources, and I use, for example, several times Wikipedia. I know, Bartosz, that we always claim to our students that we should not use Wikipedia, but I use Wikipedia as a source. I don't know if you know about the possibility that you have to go back to previous versions of pages of Wikipedia. And so, for example, if you have a look at the Wikipedia page with the term digital revolution, you could retrace the first time the page was written. And it was, if I'm not wrong, 1998 in the English version. And looking at all the changes of the page is very interesting as a source because you see how a term has changed over time and was changed over time. So even concepts and even ideas, even words change over time. Sometimes they do not change as a word per se, but they change their meanings, which is another way to look at the history of the ideas. I don't know if this is understandable or not. I'm seeing your faces and I think, okay, they are okay, good. In some sources, I found the fact that, for example, digital revolution started in the 19th century with, for example, the great mathematicians that invented the algorithms or the Boolean algebra and other stuff, or the 1950s after the Second World War when the first computers arrived, or where the ancestors of the internet like ARPANET arrived. Someone else claimed that the 1970s was a very important decade because, for example, the decade of the information revolution, the decade of the information society. So believing that there was a transformation of the society based on basically information. Someone else claimed the 1990s, etc., etc. There are sources claiming that this revolution is over. Someone else that it's yet the best is yet to come, and I will go back on this point. So, all in all, it's interesting how we all think that we live in a digital revolution, but we are not able to define what is a digital revolution, when the revolution started, which is the right name of the revolution. So there is a huge uncertainty. This uncertainty is, according to me, strategic, and it's a kind of value because you can continuously repurpose the digital revolution or alternative names, including AI revolution, as something new, as something characteristic of our contemporary society. Second point that I found is the fact that in the sources I retrace several parallelisms with other revolutions. Here I provide three of the examples from the 1980s, the 1990s, and more recent 2021. And there are parallelisms with the Industrial Revolution. So the digital revolution is as powerful as the Industrial Revolution, or if you can see the last one, the AI revolution will be a bigger impact than fire, electricity, or the internet. But my favorite one is Louis Rossetto, so the editor-in-chief of Wired. Wired is considered like the Bible of the digital revolution. And this is the first issue of Wired, 1993, when the editor-in-chief asks himself and also to the audience why we created Wired. And the answer is very good, because the digital revolution, I'm reading, is whipping through our lives like a Bengali typhoon. And I'm reading just the blue part, the social changes produced by the digital revolution are so profound, their only parallel is probably the discovery of fire. That's interesting again. So this revolution creating a narrative with parallelisms of previous revolutions. And of course, if the Industrial Revolution was important, if the discovery of fire was important, of course, the digital revolution has to be as important or even more. So this creation of parallelism is also a way to create relevance to the digital revolution. And here you can find one of my favorite ad of Apple. The Macintosh was just released in 1984. And this revolution, there are several parallelisms with the communist revolution, for example, and here Apple uses this kind of parallelism. As you can see, it's time that the capitalist makes a revolution. So Apple, in a way, is the last version of Mao, of Marx, of Lenin, which is highly misleading because this revolution is especially a revolution of capitalism. So this is right, and it's also written in the claim. But of course, there are also some parallelisms with what Karl Marx said, for example, and I will go back in a minute, but here is totally misleading because it's totally a capitalist revolution. And especially the Californian ideology behind the revolution is very important. And I'm sure, Bartosz, you will discuss with your students this idea of Californian ideology, but if you want, we can go back to that point later. A third point, a third pillar of the book is the mantras that I discovered of the digital revolution. So in the sources, there were repetitive ideas that were applied to different technologies in different periods of time. The fact that, of course, the digital revolution is disruptive, and I think that this picture can be symbolic. We can find here a very young Bill Gates. Behind him, you have several papers, and the claim of the National Geographic, it was a cover of National Geographic in 1995, is all the paper behind me is inside this CD-ROM, and is keeping his mind in his hand, a CD-ROM. Nothing older than a CD-ROM, right? So it seems to be ancient times or Greek times. It cannot be even read today by most of our computers. But at that time, 1995, the CD-ROM was the future. And this is a clear and a plastic vision of how the revolution, the digital revolution, is a revolution of dematerialization. All the paper is transformed into something digital, the CD-ROM per se. Second mantra is more about the fact that the digital revolution is total, is global, and is universal. And one of my favorite quotes is from Nicolas Negroponte, from the book that I have already mentioned. And he claimed that the digital revolution is as appealing and universal as the rock music. Who doesn't like rock music? Everyone. So everyone should even like the digital revolution, because it's something that could be understood, by everyone. So it's understandable by all the people in the world. Third point, it's irresistible. And believe it or not, I found several quotations of Tocqueville. Tocqueville discussed about the democracy as an irresistible stream of water. But big tech, in a way, quoted Tocqueville saying that even the revolution, the digital revolution, is not resistible. And if you are resisting the revolution, you are part of the past. You should not resist it. You should embrace the digital revolution as something very transformative for the society. Point number 4, very interesting to me, is the fact that the digital revolution is not over, even today. And the digital revolution, the most relevant part of the revolution, will happen in the future. There is a quotation of Bill Gates here in 2008, but there are several quotations either today or, Bill Gates is a specialist of this kind of prediction of forecastings. The best is to come. We are, the best thing is about to be there in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. The prediction of the existence of the revolution, and in a way, it's a plastic transformation of the next big thing, very popular in the Silicon Valley. So it's important the revolution is not over. It's important, point number 5, that the revolution is permanent. This is even Trotsky, so we are going towards the communist doctrina very close. And I found in several sources the relevance of the fact that the revolution is on rolling basis, is something constantly evolving over time. It's permanent, in another term. Final point. The revolution, the digital revolution, has always often been described as a quasi-religion, with its patriarchs and patron saints, its prophets, evangelists, messiahs, and gurus. All these 4 terms from 4 different religions have been used over time. The digital revolution has to be global, we said before, right? So embracing even all the religions. There are some heretics, some relics, and some meccas. I will try to show you some of the examples that are in the book to discuss and to deconstruct the idea of revolution. That's the goal of this first part. For example, if we speak about patriarchs and patron saints, for sure, if you go in Manchester, you can find the statue of Alan Turing that laid the foundation of the information technological revolution of today. Alan Turing became very famous for a movie, but also because he was one of the first inventors of an analog computer. Or I don't know if you have a look at doodles sometimes, and very often Google devotes the doodles of the day to relevant figures of the digitization. For example, George Ball, a mathematician, by the way. Or again, one of the cover of Wires here devoted to Marshall McLuhan, one of the classics of media studies. I don't know, Bartosz, if you in your class teach McLuhan, but it was elected by Wired as the electronic culture's immortal saint. So someone that, by the way, McLuhan died in 1980, if I'm not wrong. So he saw just the beginning of the revolution, but Wired claimed that it was, in a way, the immortal saint. Even more funny are the prophets of the digital revolution. And here you can see some examples of how our contemporary society create, VIP people and relevant people. Those are covers with the person of the year over time of the famous American magazine Time. And as you can see, those are all people connected, strictly connected with the digital revolution. They're all CEOs of big companies. The last one, Sam Altman, was the CEO of the year 2023. And I really like also the quotation by Time here. It's not in the book, of course, but I added recently because I think it's in the line. Altman emerged as one of the most powerful and venerated, so as a saint, executives in the world, the public face, and the leading prophet of this technological revolution, the revolution of AI. And similar words were used in the past for different technologies. This is something to bear in mind when we look at digitization in historical perspective. I also wanted to add this special exhibition by an artist from Chile. The beginning of the end is the title depicting, as you can see, Steve Jobs as a prophet, or Zuckerberg as a new opium, or Jeff Bezos as the corporate nations. And there are statues out there, even in several neighboring countries. For example, there are statues of Steve Jobs in Budapest, statues of Steve Jobs in Bucharest, if I'm not wrong. So we are in a moment in time in which the CEOs of big companies have their own status. If you want to have a look at this exhibition, there is the QR code here, and you can have a look. It's very funny, and I think very provocative on the other hand. There are some heretics that call themselves heretics. For example, Joseph Wainsman, one of the founders, we could say, of ChatGPT, or more in general, large language models, that work at the MIT in the 1980s, and call himself an heretic. Why? Because he claimed that computers would have brought humanity to a crisis. So he was a computer scientist, he worked in informatics, professor of informatics, but claiming that computers were very dangerous for contemporary society. I don't know if you have read the other guy here, so the one on the right of your screen, Evgeny Morozov, that he calls himself the digital heretic today. What is interesting here? It's interesting that more and more as academics are criticizing the digital revolution. We claim, for example, that this revolution has created surveillance, which is true, differences and inequalities, which is true again. We are claiming that big tech are creating monopolies over time, which is true again. But what is interesting here is the fact that we criticize the digital revolution, but we do not criticize the fact that this is a revolution. So the fact that it's a revolution is taken for granted. We say it's going into a bad direction, but it's a revolution. No question, it's a revolution. I just found an American economist, Robert Gordon, claiming that this is not a revolution at all. And he made some comparisons with past revolution from an economical perspective, saying, for example, that the first half of the 20th century was much more revolutionary than the second part of the 20th century, with different calculations. Let's go to the relics. So I'm closing the first part on the revolution. The other two parts will be shorter, don't worry. For example, talking about relics, I wanted to show you the first and the only time where the magazine Times that I mentioned you before elected a non-human as person, or better, machine of the year. It was in the 1982, or better, the first issue of the 1983, that elected the computer as the machine of the year. And as you can see from this quotation, we could have used a human, but we decided that the greatest influence, last line, for good or evil, is not a man at all. It's a machine, and it's called the computer. So there are relics, and the computer is one of them. One of the perfect relics is the iPhone that was released in 2007, and I really like this advertising quoting St. Thomas, touching is believing, as you can see. So one of the main characteristics of the iPhone was to have the touchscreen. And so it's a kind of relic of a saint like St. Thomas. Going to the conclusion, there are also of this first part of revolution, there are also meccas of the digital revolution, so places where you go and you discover the digital revolution. For example, the headquarters of Amazon, where you work hard, and you work hard for sure, you work a lot, as several publications show. You have fun, but you also make history. Those free claims are interesting. Another place is my research team at CERN in Geneva, where we work on the history of the web. I will discuss slightly later. As you can see, we were during the COVID time, but the most important thing is the tag behind us, where it's written in one of the corridors of CERN, where the web was born. So even at CERN, a place where you make science, especially a place for physics and computer scientists, now became famous because the web was born there. We could discuss what this born could mean. Also, The Simpsons, I don't know if The Simpsons are still relevant or important for our students, but also The Simpsons, in a way, join this idea of mechas. And for example, one of the episodes is entirely, shooted inside a store of Apple. By the way, it's not called Steve Jobs, but Steve Mobs, if I remember properly in the cartoon. But I mean, this is a kind of celebration of Steve Jobs and Apple per se. And then I really find very fun this book cover. I hope you don't know the guy that wrote this book because I make a fun of him, but I want to read it how he describes himself. So this Yavan Ezadiki is a serial entrepreneur and visionary who has been living in the Silicon Valley for the last decade, observing the digital revolution as a consumer. So we have a normal human that went to the Silicon Valley and lived as a normal consumer, but at a certain point, 2015 exactly, his observation and studies led him to a common mortal perspective, and he chose to share his view of the industry with the rest of the world. So he became like a prophet, just living in the Silicon Valley, just staying in the Silicon Valley. The relevance of Silicon Valley is also clear when we think about how many Silicon Valleys we have in different countries. For example, in Italy, my original country, we have several cities or places that consider themselves as the Italian Silicon Valley. I don't know in Poland if it's the case, but in most of the countries we have these ideas that we should replicate, copy the Silicon Valley in order to create the same environment, which is, of course, a revolutionary environment and an environment which is very favorable to a digital revolution. Is this ideology over? Probably not. Cloud computer, so something that is not in the book, but of course emerged very more recently and made a revolution. Of course, the metaverse, you remember the metaverse, should have made a total revolution, and even time, you can see this sub line here, the next digital era will change everything. It hasn't changed everything so far. Of course, AI. The ideology of revolution is clearly applied to artificial intelligence. And for example, there are godfathers, strange name, predicting that the revolution will be in the next 5 years, again, replicating these forecastings that I mentioned you before. Or politicians are not prepared to the revolution, and so we should prepare our politicians. The politicians should believe in the revolution. Or there are books on artificial intelligence revolution, and as you can read here from the subtitle, AI will change our society, our economy, our culture. So again, another technology, but the same narratives that applied to this new technology. Going to the conclusion of the keyword revolution, if as researchers, as students, we are in front of not contested and taken for granted ideas, we should ask ourselves who benefits from this perspective. Who benefits from the narratives and discourses about the revolution? And I try to provide, free answers, but I want to hear from you. Maybe you have different answers. First of all, politicians, because they invest in digitization and in the digital revolution without thinking too much about it. Of course, I have to invest as a politician in the digitization because it's something good for the society. It's the future. So we should invest in it. Second, of course, digital corporations. They narrate themselves as the key characters of the digital revolution, and so they clearly benefit from it. Third, and most provocative, all of us. So we all have to believe in something, and we have to believe in the digital revolution as we used to believe in religion in the past or in political ideologies in the past. Now we still believe that we are part of a great change, and this great change is digitization or the digital revolution. We need to justify in a way the fact that we queue in front of Apple stores when a new version of iPhone is released, or in a way we need to justify ourselves when we spend several hours of our daily time on social media, for example. So it's a kind of justification. That's my argument for all of us. Believing in the digital revolution is justifying our behaviors. As you probably have seen at the beginning, my subtitle is a short history of an ideology. What is ideological here? And I want to conclude like that. The digital revolution offers a way to look at the world, Weltanschauung, that could be applied to all phenomena and to all human beings. So it's a way to explain how a society is changing. And it's a simple explanation, very simple. It's changing because of digitization. It's changing because of digital technology. It's very deterministic as a kind of explanation. Maybe later we could discuss about technological determinism and how tech determinism is involved in all of that. But it's also useful, second point here, about the ideological dimension, it's also useful in imposing a kind of cultural hegemony and in directing some behaviors. You cannot oppose the revolution because the revolution is something happening, and so there is a cultural hegemony around the revolution. I'm not saying that the revolution is false or it's distorted or it's a lie. I'm not saying something like that. I truly believe that even CEOs and even companies, they believe they're part of the revolution. They believe in the revolution per se. So I'm not saying that ideology is equal to something bad. You know that the word ideology changed a little bit over time, and especially during the totalitarianisms in the 20th century change its meaning over time. That's the first word. Then I will be more brief. I hope I have some more time, Bartosz, 50 minutes or more, if it's okay for you. Okay, 50 minutes more, or?
Yes, absolutely fine. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so we can leave space to Q&A or comments. Okay. Recently, we published, quite recently, a paper on failure in digital media. So my second keyword is failure. And we try to theorize in this paper for international, the annuals of the ICA. We try to theorize 4 theses applied to digital media. The literature on technological failures is not new. It's a literature coming from the history of technology, for example. They show different kinds of failures. Literature coming from STS, and especially let me say that STS focus a lot on this symmetrical approach where success and failure is at the same level. Very often the history of digital revolution has been told by the winners. So the company that made it or the technologies that made it, they reconstruct this history in a linear way, as I mentioned at the beginning. But it's very important to put symmetrically successes and failures, as I said before. Media history has sometimes discussed about failures, especially a classic like Bolton and Grassi focus a lot on how old media remediate into something new. So, what is a failure if an old technology does not disappear, but it's in a way remediating into a new one? Also, media archaeology. More recently, the media history focused on failures and one of the claims is the fact that it could have been otherwise. One of the claims of media archaeology. And so disappear media, fail media are very helpful to understand the present times. I want to share with you these 4 theses and maybe we could discuss about them. Thesis number 1, the failure is flexible. Digital failure, I'm reading them. Digital failure is not a monolithic phenomenon, but always temporary and transitory. Failure is essentially a temporally and spatially situated process. A digital technology or idea can fail in one historical period and reemerge or become a success in another later historical period, or vice versa. Or again, a digital medium may be successful for some social groups or in some places and a failure in other cultural contexts. The idea with the first thesis here is to claim about the flexibility of failure. It's an historical flexibility. It could change over time. It's a cultural flexibility. Some digital technologies that are successful in a culture can be a failure in another country, other cultures, other countries. There are several histories of digital technologies that could, go into this direction. For example, the history of WAP, one of the first protocols through which you could navigate the web with your digital devices. That was a huge failure in several European countries, but a great success in Japan. So this is a typical failure that was, a failure in a specific cultural context, a success in another one, and then it's a temporary failure because this idea of surfing the web through our smartphones, for example, is very popular today. And so it's a kind of idea that reemerge over time. So first, flexibility of failure. Second, flexibility of success. And here we'll discuss a little bit more about our project on the history of the World Wide Web. I'm reading, like failure, success is flexible and sometimes destined to turn into failure. Moreover, what may appear to be a success can be a betrayal of an original idea and as such may prevent the achievements of an original imagined goal. In addition, there are several degrees of flexibility between success and failure, which can be considered 2 ideal types, and decline is one of them. Let's take the origins of the World Wide Web. And as you can see from these slides, we received a very interesting fund from the Swiss National Science Foundation. We were among the few to dig into the archives of the World Wide Web at CERN. A wonderful experience. You can see here a couple of my PhD students surrounded by boxes. By the way, all the World Wide Web collection and archive at CERN is on paper. So that's paradoxically, but it's just based on papers. There are even printed websites. So you can find websites of the early 1990s which are not available anymore that are printed. So that's an interesting source for an history. If you want to know more about the project, you can have a look and you can download the QR code. If we take the World Wide Web as an example, the World Wide Web is a huge success. Everybody's using it. But if we think about the original idea of the World Wide Web, it's a total betrayal of this original idea as the web is today. At the beginning, it was conceived as a place for horizontal communication, a place of freedom where everybody could express herself or himself. Today is totally different, and it's a place owned by a few companies, a few oligopolists, the same big tech that we mentioned before. This is not me saying like that, but it's the inventor, or one of the inventors, better, of the World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee, that in one of his recent book, I think it came out a few months ago, or 1 month ago, no more, he claimed that the web that he had in mind was totally different from the web that is there today. So again, The web is a success on the one hand, everybody's using it, but on the other, could be considered a failure or a betrayal of an original idea. I don't know if you get the point, and we could discuss about it for several other digital ideas. Third point, third thesis, is the legacy of failure. Again, I'm quoting, in a history of digital media, missteps and failures are as relevant as successes. So we put at the same level the relevance of success and the relevance of failure. Some failures have proven to be so influential that they have determined the evolution of some media, representing negative constitutive choices, and are remembered as emblematic examples not to be followed, thus helping to limit subsequent choices. Moreover, from a systemic and ecological point of view, failure is a junction in a process that can be generative of other paths. Companies that fail reorient themselves, but also technologies that fail leave room for other paths of innovation and development. There is a legacy of failures. Spectacular failures or spectacular successes change the path of history. In a way, if there is an idea and this idea failed, and I'm provocative here, think about the metaverse and how it was launched and investments of several billions of dollars, but at the end of the day, today is something empty so far. So today is a kind of a failure. Who is going to invest in the metaverse in the future? If there is this kind of spectacular failure now, probably it's a path of investment, of non-investment that will or could stay for years or decades to come. Point number 4 here, the explicability of failure. Failure is often described with a teleological attitude. So it means that the failure of digital media is narrated as inevitable. It was pretty clear that Kodak should fail, and that's one example of a spectacular failure of a company that was the most important company for the photograph industry for at least 1 century and a half that failed. And several of the stories of the failure of Kodak are clearly, teleological, saying that, of course, this company has to be failed because its business was based on paper. But all these stories, for example, forget the fact that Kodak was the first company producing the first digital camera. So it was not in late with this idea of digitization, but at the end of the day, something happens. So again, here to keep it short, alternative ideas, alternative hypertexts are examples of this. For example, today we just think that the web was the only idea at the beginning of the 1990s, the only idea of hypertexting, the only idea of networking. Is not the case. Because if you go back to the sources, if you go back to the past, it's clear how there were huge competitors like Gopher, Erki, or FTP, so file transfer protocol, that more or less were at the same level at a certain point in time. So these several ideas and several possibilities, some of them failed, some others turned into something different, and then the web remained as an example of success. But I mean, it could have been different. If you study history, that's very important. Final keyword, the keyword of maintenance. We have studied very recently maintenance in communication studies. This is the most recent paper that we published in Media Culture and Society, claiming that we should apply maintenance theory to media studies per se. We also have a book on communication maintenance in longue durée with several different examples. But I will not go in depth into all these publications, but I want to discuss with you why maintenance could be relevant for media studies, and especially digital media studies, digital media history, as it's the center of our discussion today. Question here, is maintenance at the center of communication media studies? Brief answer, not, or not yet. Innovation and change are much more relevant than maintenance and persistence and continuity in media studies. But there are several trends in other fields STS is a technology, philosophy. So it's a trend emerging on studying maintenance. And so what we are trying to do right now is linking maintenance to media and communication studies. And the other question, and I will discuss with you, is why maintenance could be relevant to digital media and history of digitization. And I provide some answers, and I want to know if you agree or not with them. First thing, as we said at the beginning with the revolution, digital media are made of material objects. Call them copper, which is still there in several of our networks, call them cables, call them devices, antennas, etc. They all need to work properly. And so, if we approach digital media and digitization with an historical perspective, we should be aware of this materiality. We should be aware of the sustainable or unsustainable dimension of all these technologies. For example, there are in every smartphone, there are more or less 40 kilos of materials that you start with 40 kilos of material, you end up with a smartphone with more or less 30 different materials and chemical objects inside a single smartphone. This is producing a lot of rubbish, a lot of digital rubbish, we could call them. It's also linked to the obsolescence, sometimes a programmed obsolescence of our digital devices. We all experience the fact that our devices are getting old very rapidly, right? So we are forced to change our smartphones or our computers every year and a half, every 2 years, 3 years, whatever. So first thing, sorry, I need to blow my nose and I go back. First thing, why is maintenance relevant to digital media and digitization history is the fact that maintenance can make very clear the material dimension of digitization. Second point is the fact that maintenance is something very important and not very, very expensive for the companies, for example. It's a kind of never-ending effort. Think about Google services and think about all the services that had to run continuously. Think about the WhatsApp down, which is something that we all experience and is something very, difficult to tolerate. So all the companies are trying to avoid these downs. So it's at the center of the business model of digital technologies today, trying to make their services running without problems continuously. Third point, I think is very important. When we think about maintenance, we think about technical issues, but it's not only the case of technologies. Maintaining or not maintaining a digital network, a digital antenna, or a digital device, more in general, is especially a political choice. Think about every time that we are forced to pass into another browser. And Microsoft is very experienced about it. When Microsoft decides to switch into another system, we are all forced to switch into another system. Why we switch into another system? Because the previous one is not maintained anymore. So if we keep on using that one, it's becoming older and older and more difficult to be used. This is a political choice made by a company. It's always a political choice maintaining or not maintaining previous digital or non-digital technologies. Maintaining or not maintaining telephone networks, for example. It's a political choice. It's also an economic decision, point number two. Sometimes not maintaining could be less expensive. We abandon the network, for example, and who cares about it? Sometimes maintaining is less expensive. It's better maintaining the network to keep the service running, and so our users will pay for the service and the service running. That's the reason why WhatsApp down is very dangerous for Meta, so the company owning WhatsApp, because they want us to continuously going on with their services. But it's also, last point here, a user's choice. There are a couple of chapters that were written recently from media studies, especially Corina Pyle wrote a chapter with a nice title, We Are All Maintainers. And we all maintain our digital technologies. I choose a picture here of someone cleaning the screen of a smartphone. We all clean our digital devices. The other picture is more, I forgot to mention it about the materiality. This is one of the undersea cable. 99% of the internet traffic, international internet traffic today, goes through undersea cables. So cables that are hidden, we cannot see them, and they are literally in the last part of our Earth. So where the oceans or the seas ends, we could say. Very difficult to be maintained, so you need to do it in a different way. So third point here is maintenance is not only a technical issue, it's a political, it's an economic, and it's even something related to users. Maintenance, last point here, could be useful to rebalancing the ways we study digital media and we study digitization. Very often we focus on the hype of a technology. Today we are in a huge hype of artificial intelligence. Several scholars, are claiming that this bubble is about to explode, but we are in a moment of hype. And as scholars, as students, we should decide if we want to follow the hype of big tech and the hype of technologies when they study our stuff or not. There is a very interesting book called The Shock of the Old, written by a very nice historian of technology, David Edgerton, and he claims that technologies are relevant when we do not talk about them, where they are so old and so they enter so much in our everyday habits that they are inevitable. We have to use them. So this is the shock of the old, according to him. And it's a way to rebalance the way we study digital media digitization, also because if we focus on maintenance, we avoid what Russell and Winsel called innovation centrism. So we tend to focus on innovation, we tend to focus on hype. If we focus on maintenance, we focus on all technologies and what needs to be maintained and last. My last slide, why I decided today to combine and put together these three keywords. First, to deconstruct. As historians, as media scholars, as students and scholars of digital technologies, we should try to deconstruct take for granted ideas. And understanding them is the first step, deconstructing them, is the first step to understand them better. So, for example, we should ask which are the meanings of revolution and if they change over time, which is the meaning of failure. I try to deconstruct the idea of failures in the four theses, which is also the meaning of maintenance. Is just a technological meaning or, as I claim, political, economic, and even related to users. So, first thing, deconstruction of taken for granted ideas. I think it's a huge and important task of history per se and history of digitization, especially in this case. Second point, again about history. History is useful to check how ideas or how devices came into being or not came into being, how they changed, but also how they did not change. So again, at the beginning, I claimed the fact that I really think that we should balance change and persistence, revolution, and what it's going to last. And I think this is very relevant. So persistence, there are several persistences that I try to, discuss today. Persistence is in the discourses, a discourse of revolution that it's keep on going since at least the 1970s, 1960s, and even before. There is a persistence in the winning narrative, while I think we should also focus on failures, a persistence in looking at innovation, and I claim that we should look at maintenance as well. Final point, I think that digitization has its own history, and digitization is leaving traces behind itself. Digitization is leaving objects, is leaving material objects, old technologies that are still in our homes. For example, I would like to ask your students, Bartosz, if they throw away the previous smartphones. I keep my smartphones at home. I don't know why, but I keep them secretly in one of my boxes at home. So production of objects and material production of objects, production of ideas that did not succeed or ideas that succeed, but they could also persist even mythologically over time. So digitization has its own history. And that's my last claim. And thank you for the attention. I hope it was not too long.
Thank
Thanks
you.
again.
Thank you very much. It was really lovely. I think I need to let you go, right? If you need to go, you can go. I will just stay here because perhaps there are some questions and comments and some time, so maybe people might want to stay and talk about the amazing topic that it was the revolution, maintenance, and failure. Bye bye. See ya.
Bye bye. See you all.
Take care. Bye bye. I'll just send